The call came through just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. The kind of call that makes your gut churn before you even hang up. Detective Thorne, the dispatcher said, her voice flat but urgent. We've got a homicide at the old train yard. You'd better get down here. By the time I arrived, the morning fog still hung low, wrapping the scene in an eerie gray haze. Yellow tape fluttered weakly in the breeze, and the usual crowd of uniforms milled around, trying not to step on anything important. The victim lay sprawled near a stack of rusting freight containers, her lifeless eyes staring at a sky she'd never see again. Early 20s, dark hair, petite. She was dressed like she'd been out for the night. Black dress, heels, the kind of outfit that said she'd been planning on going somewhere, not ending up here. What do we know? I asked Officer Morales, who was scribbling in his notebook nearby. Not much yet. No ID on her. Looks like blunt force trauma to the head. But the coroner will have to confirm. I nodded, scanning the area. The train yard was the perfect place for a crime like this. Isolated, dark, a warren of hiding places. If anyone had seen anything, they weren't stepping forward. Or so I thought. Detective, Morales said, jerking his thumb toward the edge of the scene. There's a guy over there who might have seen something. I followed his gesture to a figure sitting on an overturned crate. He was bundled in layers of ragged clothing, his face obscured by a tangle of beard and a dirty knit cap. As I approached, he looked up, and I caught the glint of wary blue eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak. Morning, I said, crouching slightly to meet his gaze. I'm Detective Thorne. You see what happened here? The man tilted his head, then pointed to his throat and shook it. Mute. Great. Can you write? I asked. He shook his head again. Instead, he reached into a pocket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping to a blank page. His hands were steady, deliberate, as he began to draw. I watched as lines and shapes took form. The outline of a figure, a rectangle, a car, I realized, and something in the figure's hand that looked like a crowbar. You saw this? I asked, holding up the notebook. He nodded. Where? He pointed toward a gap between the freight containers. I gestured for Morales to follow me, and we picked our way through the narrow corridor. The smell of oil and rust was sharp in the air, and every sound, our footsteps, the distant hum of the city waking up, seemed magnified. Here, Morales said, stopping short. There was a smear of blood on the ground, leading toward a set of tire tracks in the dirt. They stopped abruptly, as if the car had been parked here before peeling out. Get forensics on this, I said, my pulse quickening, and see if we can match those tire treads. Back at the scene, the mute man was watching us intently. I walked over, holding up the notebook again. Can you draw the license plate? I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head, his expression frustrated. Instead, he flipped to another page and began sketching again. This time, it was a face. Angular jaw, sharp nose, a baseball cap pulled low over the eyes. You saw the driver? I asked, and he nodded. The sketch was crude but clear enough. It was something more than I'd had 5 minutes ago. I handed the notebook back, and he clutched it to his chest, his eyes pleading. For what, I wasn't sure. Morales, I said, get this guy some coffee and something to eat. As Morales led him away, I turned back to the crime scene. There were pieces here, fragments of a puzzle. A dead woman, a silent witness, a shadowy figure with a crowbar. But the picture was far from clear, and I had the sinking feeling it was going to get worse before it got better. I glanced at the sketch again, committing the face to memory. Whoever this guy was, he'd made one mistake, leaving a witness behind, even if that witness couldn't speak. And I was going to make sure he paid for it. The crime scene lingered in my mind as I drove back to the precinct. The sketch of the suspect's face sat on the passenger seat, staring back at me like a taunt. I'd seen that type before, the kind of guy who thought he could get away with anything because no one cared enough to stop him. Well, he just crossed paths with someone who cared a hell of a lot. I pushed through the precinct doors, the familiar hum of activity washing over me. Officers exchanged files, phones rang off the hook, and the faint aroma of burnt coffee lingered in the air. I headed straight to the bullpen, where Morales was already typing up his notes. Anything from forensics on the tire tracks? I asked, tossing my coat over the back of a chair. Not yet, he replied, not looking up. But the text said they'd prioritize it. Should hear back in a couple of hours. Good. And the witness? Our artist? What's his deal? Morales leaned back, stretching his arms. Name's Henry Booker. Homeless. Been hanging around the train yard for months, maybe longer. Doesn't talk, but apparently he's got a sharp eye. Uniforms say he's helped point out a few things before. Minor stuff like trespassers and stolen goods. So he's reliable? Morales shrugged. As reliable as someone in his situation can be. The coffee and sandwich helped, though. He's still in the break room if you want to follow up. I nodded, filing the information away. Booker might not have said a word, but his drawings had already told me more than most witnesses ever could. Before heading to the break room, I stopped by my desk and pulled up the database. I uploaded the sketch, running it through facial recognition. Chances of a match were slim, but it was worth a shot. While the system churned, I grabbed a notepad and jotted down some thoughts. Who was she? Why the train yard? Blunt force trauma. Personal? Booker's sketch of the crowbar haunted me. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. Brutal. Intentional. But why her? I found Booker nursing his coffee, his notebook clutched protectively in his lap. He looked up as I entered, his eyes wary but less guarded than before. I sat across from him, keeping my tone calm and steady. Henry, I said, sliding the notebook sketch of the suspect's face toward him. This is good work. Really good. But I need your help again. Can you tell me anything else about this guy? Anything at all? He hesitated, then opened his notebook and began flipping through pages. Each sketch was detailed, almost haunting. Landscapes of the train yard, faces of people who passed through. It was like a visual diary. He stopped on a page and tapped it. A sketch of a car. Same rectangle shape as before, but this time with a detail I hadn't noticed earlier. A sticker on the back window. Can you draw the sticker up close? I asked. He nodded, his pencil moving with precision. When he finished, he handed me the page. The sticker was circular, with blocky letters that read Riverside Auto Club and a pair of crossed wrenches beneath the text. Morales, I called out, sticking my head into the bullpen. He appeared a moment later. Yeah, run this, I said, handing him the drawing of the sticker. See if we've got anything on this Riverside Auto Club. Members, locations, anything. You got it, he said, disappearing down the hall. I turned back to Booker. You're doing great, Henry. Anything else you remember? Anything at all could make a difference. He pointed to his coffee, then made a writing motion with his hand. I passed him a fresh sheet of paper and watched as he started sketching again. This time, the lines came slower, more deliberate. When he was done, he pushed the paper toward me. It was a map, rough but clear enough to make out the landmarks. The train yard was marked with an X, and a winding path led to a circle labeled Riverside Garage. Looks like we've got a lead, I muttered. I grabbed my coat and headed out. Whoever this guy was, his time was running out. The Riverside Garage was tucked into the industrial part of town, a nondescript building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. It had the kind of vibe that screamed, don't ask too many questions. A handful of cars sat in the lot, all in various states of disrepair. The air smelled of grease, gasoline, and desperation. I parked a block away and approached on foot, taking in the scene. A couple of guys were working under the hood of a beat-up sedan, their voices low and casual. A third sat on a stool by the garage entrance, smoking a cigarette and scrolling through his phone. None of them looked like the guy from the sketch, but that didn't mean he wasn't inside. I stepped into the garage, the sound of my boots on concrete announcing my arrival. The smokers and grease monkeys glanced up, their eyes narrowing in unison. Help you with something? One of them asked, wiping his hands on a filthy rag. He was stocky, with tattoos snaking up his forearms and a scowl etched into his face. Yeah, I said, flashing my badge. Detective Thorne. I'm looking for someone who might work here, or hang around here. You seen this guy? I held up the sketch Booker had drawn. Tattoo guy glanced at it, then shook his head. Never seen him, the smoker at the entrance snorted. What's he supposed to have done? Just answer the question, I said, my tone firm but calm. The smoker shrugged. Don't know him. Looks like half the guys in this neighborhood, though. Could be anyone. I wasn't buying it. Something about their body language felt off. Too practiced, too quick to deny. I decided to press further. Mind if I take a look around? I asked, already moving past them. Hey, you got a warrant? Tattoo guy snapped, stepping into my path. I stopped, leveling him with a stare. You want me to get one? Because I can shut this place down for the day while I do. Or you can step aside and save yourself the paperwork. He hesitated, jaw working as he debated his options. Finally, he stepped back with a muttered curse. I moved deeper into the garage, my eyes scanning for anything that might connect this place to the murder. And then I saw it. A car parked in the corner, partially covered by a tarp. The shape matched Booker's drawing, and through the back window I could just make out the faint outline of a Riverside Auto Club sticker. Bingo! I circled the car, pulling out my phone to snap some photos. The tires looked fresh, the kind you'd put on to replace a set that might leave incriminating tracks. My pulse quickened as I crouched to check the undercarriage, hoping for any overlooked evidence. That's when I heard the faint click of a hammer being cocked. Stand up. Slowly. The voice was low, steady, and too close for comfort. I raised my hands and turned, coming face to face with the man from the sketch. He was holding a gun, his baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. You've been busy, I said, keeping my tone even. Not busy enough, apparently, he replied, gesturing with the gun. Step away from the car. I took a step back, my mind racing. He was cornered, which made him dangerous, but it also made him sloppy. He hadn't noticed Morales creeping up behind him, moving like a shadow through the garage. Drop it, Morales barked, his gun drawn. The suspect froze, his eyes darting between us. For a second, I thought he might try something stupid. Then he lowered the gun, letting it clatter to the ground. Smart choice, I said, moving in to cuff him. Up close, I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the twitch in his jaw. You want to tell me why a woman ended up dead at the train yard last night? Or should we skip to the part where I make sure you never see daylight again? He didn't answer, just stared at the ground. But I didn't need a confession, not yet. Between Booker's sketch, the car, and the weapon we'd find in the trunk, I had more than enough to put him away. As Morales hauled him out to the cruiser, I stayed behind for a moment, taking in the scene. Another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, but something still nagged at me. The crime felt personal, intentional. But why her? And why here? I'd have to wait for forensics to confirm the details. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.